extremely happy to be here today and honored. You know, what the Mission Support Division does, and we'll get into that a little bit more deeply, is really we support all of the other programs in the region, including the tribal program, which Jeremy represents. And so I'll show you how we do that ever so briefly. I think after every slide, I'm gonna stop and Angela's gonna take down the presentation and see if there's any questions related to that particular slide. So Angela, if you could go to the org chart slide. So I apologize for boring everybody with an organizational chart, but I feel like it's probably the best way that I can explain what the Mission Support Division does. So I'm Kerry Drake, I'm the director, and I'm in the immediate office at the top. So, you know, as I said earlier, we support all of the programs at EPA Region 9. So human resources is one of the branches in our division. Very likely you won't deal with our human resources branch, so I'll just move on from there. And then the other branch that you probably don't deal with a lot, although you probably could, is that infrastructure services branch. That's the one where we have IT and then also all of our, that we manage all of our facilities and physical security and the health, you know, like health and safety officers in there, you know, we have a contract nurse. But that's something that's really pretty internal to EPA, although there could be, I think, some IT back and forth that you all deal with. The other three branches you probably, whether you know it or not, deal with to some extent or need to be. So I'll get into that in a minute. But the grants branch, that's Carolyn Truong, who's on the call today. Hi, Carolyn. And Angela Mendiola, who's also on the call today. Angela. They're in the grants branch. And so what our division does is we administer the grants. Well, what does that mean? So I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. The financial management branch has two sections that you probably, one that you probably might deal with and one that you probably don't, but they're both important to you. And then the contracts branch. So, you know, just to kind of follow the flow of money through EPA, and I'll have slides later on. But when Congress appropriates funds, and then it gets provided to EPA, EPA divides it up primarily into the national programs: the Office of Water, the Office of Air and Radiation, the Office of Intergovernmental and Tribal Affairs. So, you know, so basically at headquarters, all of the programs get money, and then those programs further provide that money to the regions. And a lot of that money is provided to go into grants to all of our recipients. And so, so all of the money that comes into the region actually comes from a national program. For example, you know, the tribal program comes from OIDA. The funding for the GAP program comes through OIDA to the tribal program GAP, you know, section. Where that actually goes, though, is into our budget section. I mean, the budget section is kind of like our bank, if you will. So Jeremy and his folks will work with the individual grant recipients on all, you know, the work plans and the things that we need to accomplish, you know, for example, through the GAP program. It's likewise in Water Division and all the other divisions. But once the work plans have been worked out, the applications have submitted, the work plans are worked out, and a dollar amount is associated with that, the budget section then would have to be, you know, again, as the bank, they would have to commit the funds to a certain grant. The funding recommendation would then go to the grants branch, which has a whole lot of administrative things that we have to make sure are done to make sure that the use of federal funds complies with federal law. And so the grants branch is headed by Carolyn Truong, who's actually the grants management officer. She is the person in the region that is delegated the authority to award grants. So any grant that's awarded actually comes out of the grants branch, and Carolyn and her folks put the packages together and make sure that all of the administrative requirements are put together. So then the grants branch, along with the programs, as we go through time, would manage the grants, through quarterly reports and other mechanisms, and doing, programmatic assessments or baseline assessments, we call them, and administrative baseline assessments to make sure that the grant recipients are doing what they said they were going to do with the money, and that they're meeting the federal requirements for documenting that. And so if something goes off the rails, the grants branch, Carolyn is also the one, she's our action official. She's the one that would also perhaps send a letter, an action letter, saying, to a recipient, you might need to comply with this. If you don't comply with it, you might need to get the money back. That sort of thing. So Carolyn is also, the grants branch is also the enforcement mechanism for compliance and grants. The other section in the financial management branch is the accounting section. And I really wanted to highlight this, and it's probably the only time I'm going to highlight it, because we don't like to focus on things that some might perceive as negative, but the accounting section is just that. There's accountants, and anytime that there's an audit of a grant, the accounting section would coordinate that and work with the IG or the General Accountability Office, or if it's an EPA audit, a GD audit, the accountants in our accounting section would coordinate those audits to make sure that there's no waste, fraud, and abuse. So as you can see, our division is all about not so much the work plans. That's really between a grant recipient and the programs. What is meant to be accomplished with the federal funding. Our division is really all about making sure that the money is utilized within federal regulations, and that we are all compliant with that. And so we have mechanisms for that. Lastly, the contracts branch, which I'll go into in a minute, is growing a little bit in importance to several tribes, and I'll go into that in a second. But I think there's also some missed opportunities that I'm going to list later on a contracts branch slide that tribes might be able to avail themselves of. So kind of with that, that's the organizational chart. I'm going to go into several of these a little bit deeper, but can we take this down for a second, Angela, and see if there's any questions in general about the Mission Support Division?
Okay, no questions in the chat box right now.
Okay.
But if anybody does have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or type it in the chat box.
This is Lisa Dover. I have a question. Where is Laura Ebert in this?
That's a great question. So Laura is actually in a different division. She actually is the director of the Tribal Intergovernmental and Policy Division, which includes the tribal program that Jeremy heads up, Jeremy Bauer, and that CJ is in. So she's in a different division. She would be what I call the program. The program is the one that works with the grant recipients, for example, from the GAP grants, to work out the work plan. What is it that the recipient and the program, and by the program in this case I mean Laura, Jeremy, CJ, what is it that they want to accomplish with the GAP funding? What do you want to accomplish with it? So that's really the program. My division is more, it's more financial, making sure that all of the financial and grants regulations are complied with.
Okay, again, just to follow up, I thought she was under mission support, and I thought AIEO is under mission support in headquarters. So I'm thoroughly and totally and probably irreparably confused.
Well, Lisa, I understand being irreparably confused, because I think I exist in a state of irreparable confusion myself. But no, Laura reports directly. The TIP division reports directly to the regional administrator, and I think OIDA is the same way. I think Chad McIntosh at headquarters reports to the administrator. So, but there's a different Office of Mission Support at headquarters. that I report to. I report to both the regional administrator here and to the Office of Mission Support at headquarters, as well as the Office of the Chief Financial Officer. That's who I report to. Okay, let's put up the next slide. All right, so this is the good news slide. So we do provide quite a bit of, Congress, I should say, the government provides quite a bit of money through Region 9 to the tribes for environmental programs. And so last year it was almost $41 million. And so that's through 18 different EPA programs. And so a lot of it, over 20 million, is for what we call in continuing environmental programs. So that's like the GAP program, like the Clean Water Act 106, like Clean Air Act 105. That's the kind of continuing, ongoing funding stream through which EPA assists, in this case, tribes in ensuring that there are environmental programs. Likewise, we have continuing environmental programs through some of these very same ones, not GAP, but Clean Water Act 106, Clean Air Act 105, PPGs, et cetera, for states and local governments as well. But the continuing environmental program grants are just exactly what it sounds like, is to provide support for maintaining and running environmental programs. So that's the biggest chunk of the funding. Another chunk is the money that comes from Congress through it's called the State Revolving Fund Program, but it's basically water infrastructure. So it's clean water infrastructure and wastewater infrastructure. That's the funding that goes for those big either clean water or wastewater projects. And then there's another fairly big chunk of money that goes to cleaning up pollution on tribal lands and responding to emergencies. And that's what that bottom, I guess, chunk is. So I think maybe, Angela, we could go to the next slide, because I think it really feeds right from this slide. So we have a continuing resolution. That's what we're operating under right now. So me and all of the other EPA folks on the call today are very happy that there was not a government shutdown, that Congress passed and that the president signed a continuing resolution so that the government would continue being funded. So what a continuing resolution in this case essentially does is extends the funding levels that we had last year. So if, for example, if we had a continuing resolution that lasted all year long, then you might expect to see a similar amount of money available to tribes, which you saw in the previous slide, which was around a little over 40 million. But we don't know what really is going to happen. That's just the continuing resolution that we have right now actually just goes through December 11th. And so hopefully Congress will continue working on an FY21 budget, and they could have an appropriation or an enacted budget by that date, or just based on history, other things could happen, which is maybe then there would be a government shutdown, or more likely there would be another continuing resolution, or there's just any number of things that could happen on December 11th. But we all know that from the history that we've lived for the last decade or so. And then finally, when we get an appropriation, we develop an operating plan. So for example, we've already developed an operating plan for the continuing resolution that goes through December 11th. So that comes through, if you remember that organizational chart earlier, that operating plan comes through the budget section in the Mission Support Division. And so again, I kind of liken them to the bank. So the budget section is sort of the bank for the region. Anyway, that's the budget update. I don't really know anything more than that we are fortunately under a continuing resolution right now. So, and why don't we take this back down, Angela, and see if there's any questions.
Hey, Kerry, yeah, we have one from Lisa Grover in the chat box. Can you confirm last fiscal year means FY 2020?
Yes. Yes, last year, when I say last year, I do mean fiscal year 2020, which just ended on September 30th. Thank you for that clarification, Lisa. I forget, you know, when we federal government types start, you know, tossing around things like last year and we're in October, it could get confusing. So thank you.
I'm still learning too. Constantly thinking in 3 years.
Yeah.
Another question.
Yes. Okay. So Angela, if you could put back up the slide, the presentation. Is that the next one? Yes, it is. Okay, you got it. All right, so I mentioned the contracts branch earlier, and that really doesn't, I don't know that the tribes deal directly with our contract section very often. That's because by nature, federal acquisition is buying services for the federal government. So for example, anything that our contracts branch purchases, any contract that they enter into is basically on behalf of EPA. They're purchasing a service or a good for EPA. But I wanted to put it up here because there is some interaction with tribal nations. So with the very large special account that EPA manages for cleanup of abandoned uranium mines. Sorry, my computer has decided it wants to be plugged in. Hold on. You know, for that very large special account, using that special account, we're in the process of acquiring services, you know, for the actual cleanup of uranium mines on the Navajo Nation. So that'll likely be awarded by the end of November, and it could be worth up to $220 million over 5 years. And so that's actually the federal government, we ourselves, purchasing those cleanup services. So this follows on another contract that was several years ago, which was called the Reyes contract, which was actually the assessment of, which is the first step, the assessment of the uranium pollution on, you know, tribal lands in that part of the world. So the reason I wanted to mention the contracts update is this isn't money that would go to tribes directly, but it's funding that we, the government, would use to acquire services. You know, in this case for tribal lands. But then the main reason I really wanted to put up the contract slide was I would encourage all of you, and if you are interested in it, you could contact me and I could put you in touch with you know, somebody in my office that can help provide information on it. A lot of tribal nations are considered to be historic underutilized business zones, hub zones, and businesses that reside in those hub zones can be certified to become a hub zone business, but they would have to obtain the necessary certification from the Small Business Administration. And why is that important? If a business is inside a hub zone, and let's say that I think that many tribes could be considered hub zones. There are actually federal contracting goals for providing federal contracts to hub zone businesses, and that could help those businesses get a leg up on the competition. And so how would I trace this backwards? So we're working, there's actually an office at headquarters in EPA. It's in the Office of the Administrator. It's called the Office of Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization. that we can work with businesses to help them understand how to become certified, because we have goals. The federal government has been given goals by Congress about how many contracts that we let to hub zones. So you can see up above on that very large contract that we're purchasing cleanup services for Navajo Nation, that we set it aside for small businesses, all of it. And I can't say any more than that, but there are any number of businesses that will be competing for that award. Because it's still in process, I can't say any more for that. You know, some things could be set aside for hub zone contractors, and it could be anything. If somebody had a trucking company, for example, that was able to help in the, you know, the cleanup or the moving around of dirt and other things that have to be done during a cleanup, and they were certified as a hub zone business, they could have a competitive advantage. So I really just wanted to highlight for everybody here that the Small Business Administration, this is where you would really go to become certified, not EPA. But the Small Business Administration is the one that certifies businesses for hub zone opportunities. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody is aware of that, because I think this is an important distinction, that the federal government, when it's acquiring services, actually has goals for using hub zone businesses. Anyway, we can go ahead and take that down, Angela, and see if there's any questions. Seeing none, hearing none, let's go ahead and move to the next one. All right. So compliance assistance. So you saw earlier when I was put the organizational chart up that one of the most important functions of my division, in addition to supporting the programs like the GAP program or like water program or air program, you know, it's really our responsibility in many ways to make sure that when the federal money is going to a recipient, that it's used in the way that it said it was going to be used, and that it's used in compliance with federal regulations. And so what has happened in the past is that we sometimes don't find out that money wasn't used properly until after a grant work period has been closed, and it's too late to do anything with the money other than have, you know, start a formal enforcement action and recover it, you know, from the recipient, and then that money would just go back into the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury, once it's recovered. So along with Jeremy Bauer, who's on the line, our division, in cooperation with Jeremy and his tribal program, wanted to have a compliance assistance pilot this year, just specifically for the GAP grants. And, you know, so what we really worked on was trying to, you know, identify ways where we could detect very early if there might be some problems with complying with the federal grant regulations that would later have led to, you know, that would either lead to environmental work not being performed, or worse, later to some costly, you know, compliance that we don't want to get into. And so I'm just really happy to report that kind of with this early compliance assistance and early detection, even though it was just, you know, the very first year of a pilot, and even though it was on just one grant program, we were able to I guess, redirect $187,000 this year to make sure that it was properly used by recipients for environmental projects, and instead of turning into some compliance and enforcement situation later on where that money is just lost for environmental work. And so, you know, I just wanted to say, we believe that compliance assistance is a really good way to go on making sure that the federal grant regulations are complied with. So anyway, Mervyn has a question, it looks like.
Hey, Kerry, so Mervyn's asking, could it be necessary to be clarified and made clear in the work plan negotiations of these requirements to prevent non-compliance with grant use?
That's a really great question, Mervyn, and absolutely spot on. You know, we are working with, as part of this pilot, we are working to make sure that things are much more clear in work plans, together with Jeremy and the tribal program. And you know, I think we're also making some strides there. Jeremy, did you want to add anything? Since it's a kind of a work plan.
I would just say that this aligns with some of the things we talked about at the art talk during the GAP session about we've been working to make sure deliverables are very clear in the work plan. So it's clear that when we do the end of year evaluation, whatever's in the deliverable, that's what the project officer will be looking for. And also being more proactive about checking in every quarter to make sure that things are on track and that everyone's on the same page of where the goalposts are.
Yep. Great question, Mervyn. And so the follow-up question, it looks like, Mervyn, and this is kind of Jeremy, because the project officers are actually in your shop, was how responsive are the project officers to the requirement?
Yeah, so people are very responsive to this idea of being more proactive. And one of the things we're doing to hold ourselves accountable is actually check in on this each week as part of our weekly team huddle. And we try visually, we have charts and graphs so we can see where this has been accomplished and where we have to work harder to get it done.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate it, and I appreciate the partnership with you and your folks. We're gonna roll this out. That was kind of the next thing on the slide. We're gonna roll this pilot. We feel like was so successful. We're going to work with the other programs like water program and air program that have learned together with Jeremy and his folks to the other divisions, because we feel like this is a much more positive way to go. And just clarity, like you said, Mervyn, is just so important. We can do better too. So, and then, you know, we provide, from my office in conjunction with the programs, provide quite a bit of outreach, supportive technical assistance. So if you could go to the next slide, and this is where Angela Mendiola, who's on the call, who's actually running the slides, helps us quite a bit. So last year, by last year I mean fiscal year 20. Thank you, Lisa. We provided 20. We were able to physically go to 20 technical assistance and outreach visits for tribes in conjunction with the programs to try to help educate us, because we learn always when we do technical and compliance assistance, but also to the tribes on, you know, how to you know, use federal money successfully. And then, so now we're learning, and that's this next bullet, to do what we're doing right now, which is we're still trying to provide technical and compliance assistance. We're just learning how to do it remotely, like this. So if you could go to the next slide, Angela. So COVID-19, I know there could be questions, although I think most people have it down because I know that it's been spoken about at several conferences now, but it's good to reinforce it. And Carolyn Truong, who's our grants management officer, is on today, as well as Angela, can provide more details probably than I can. But, you know, there are things that the agency is doing to try to help with the issues that many of you have had. We have too, 100% teleworking. We are for a long time. We're kind of trickling back into work at this point. But we had to learn how to do things during the time of COVID. And so those 4 sub-bullets are things that you're probably aware of, that there's some no-cost extensions allowed. There's been some extensions for reporting requirements. Sometimes if people aren't, you know, able to use their computer systems, we've, you know, used snail mail and pen and ink, you know, kind of retrograde, but, you know, we're doing whatever we can to keep things moving. And then you know, we're just making sure that we are going above and beyond. If there's missing materials or missing documents that would keep us from awarding a grant, for example, we're just going above and beyond to make sure that we work with the grant recipients to get those. And I'm so happy to report that in conjunction with Jeremy and his team and the tribal programs and all of the divisions, we were able to award in fiscal year 20 every single one of the tribal grants on time. So it was actually a big effort for you, for you, the tribes, but also for EPA to make sure that this happened, because it's very, very, very important for us to make sure that the money that Congress appropriates for environmental programs gets out there and does some environmental good. So this is kind of a congratulatory slide to everybody during this year of chaos and calamity that we are still moving forward. So everybody here that's on the call probably should take a bow, in my opinion, because we're continuing to move forward. And I think that might be the last slide. Is that correct? Yes. All right. So yeah, go ahead and take the presentation down. Let's just see if there's any other questions for me or Angela or Carolyn or Jeremy or CJ or anybody else that's EPA on the line. I'm reopening the chat box. Okay, I can see it now. Oh, good morning to you, Debbie Rasmussen. Said good morning in the chat box earlier. Good morning back. All right. Well, so Jeremy knows where to find me. So if you feel like that you have any assistance or help or suggestions for me and the folks in my division, you know, our primary goal is to support the mission of the EPA, and that means supporting you. And so we will do any and everything that we can within the law to do that. So, you know, just, you know how to get hold of me by getting hold of Jeremy. So I guess with that, I think we're done. Unless, Jeremy, you have any other thoughts?
No, I would just share one quick thought, Kerry, that Kerry mentions the pilot of compliance support that his division has been working on. And you've heard me at this point talk a lot about tracking the quarterly reports more closely and more proactively. Those two efforts really go hand in hand. Part of what Kerry's group's pilot is about is looking for any indicator that a grant might be not necessarily heading in compliance. So if there's a missing quarterly report and then there's a series of missing quarterly reports, the idea is to try to address that early before it grows out of proportion and requires something more significant. So the tracking of the quarterly reports more closely is really one of the outgrowths of the pilot. And so just wanted to emphasize that connection.
Oh, good. Thank you, Jeremy. Carolyn, did you have any thoughts that you wanted to add, the Grants Management Officer?
Good morning, everybody. Yes, please join us next Wednesday, October 14th. My branch will provide an update and provide you A to Z brand management training. So please do join us on October 14th.
Great. A to Z grants management training on October 14th. Thank you so much, Carolyn. Angela, did you have any words that you wanted to share?
No, I just wanted to add to Carolyn. So the time for our session will be at 1:30. So we hope that if you have any one who's learning the process for the first time or want a refresher on grants management, please come. Please join us. And thank you, Kerry.
Alrighty. Well, bye, everybody. It was great talking and seeing everybody. Have a great day.
One question. Debbie just asked how to join. It's just the same thing through the conference agenda. It's one of the breakout sessions.
Thank you, CJ. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.